I never thought I'd be the kind of person who spies on her husband. But that changed the night I saw a text pop up on his phone. It was from someone named James from work. The message was just a red heart. I stared at it for a long time. My husband doesn't send heart emojis to James. And then I noticed something else, the contact photo. It was blank, like he'd just made it up quickly. That's when I started paying attention. Little things felt off. I found a lipstick in his car that I didn't own. He said it must have been old, from before we met. But I've cleaned that car dozens of times. I would have seen it. Then there were the nights he got up and said he was going to work late, but he came back without his laptop. My sister started acting strange too. She wouldn't look me in the eye when we met for coffee. She barely talked and always looked nervous. So I decided to pretend to sleep. I waited until he thought I was out cold. I kept my breathing slow and deep. I heard him get up around 1:30 a.m. The floor creaked under his feet. He moved quietly, but I caught the sound of whispering downstairs. I slipped out of bed, barefoot, and crept down the stairs. I stayed in the shadows, my heart pounding. He was in the kitchen, talking in a low voice. I peeked around the corner and saw him walk toward the garage door. I followed him silently, careful not to make a sound. He opened the door and stepped outside. I saw someone standing there under the porch light. It was my sister. She looked nervous, arms crossed. He handed her a thick envelope. She opened it quickly, flipping through the pages like she knew exactly what was inside. He said something I'll never forget. "She'll never know." I backed away slowly, heart racing. My legs felt weak. I went back upstairs and got into bed, pretending to be asleep again. My mind was spinning. What were they hiding from me? Why was he giving her papers in the middle of the night? What did he mean? She'll never know? I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my sister, felt like a lie. I wasn't sure what I had just seen, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out what was in that envelope, and I had to act like I still didn't know anything. The next morning, I waited for my husband to leave. He kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. I smiled back, trying not to shake. As soon as the door closed, I ran to the garage. I looked around carefully. Nothing was left outside. But when I checked the trash can, I saw the envelope. It was torn open but still there. My hands were cold as I pulled it out. Inside, I found papers. Some of them looked familiar. My birth certificate was there. My driver's license too, but it was a copy. There were other documents, official-looking ones. One had a stamp and a signature at the bottom. It looked like it had been signed by a notary. My husband is a notary. He always kept his stamp in his office drawer. At the top of one page, in bold letters, it said incompetency petition. I didn't understand at first. I read it again, slower this time. It was a legal form. It said I was mentally unfit, that I couldn't take care of myself, that I needed someone else to be responsible for my life. I kept reading, even though my hands were shaking. The words on the page felt like a punch in the stomach. It said I was confused, that I forgot things, that I was paranoid, that I needed help. But none of it was true. They were lies. Someone had written this to make me look like I had lost my mind. I flipped through the rest of the papers. It wasn't just one form. It was a whole set. All of them were about me. I sat down on the cold floor. My breath was short, and my eyes burned. I kept asking myself, why would he do this? Why would my own husband say I was crazy? I thought about the way he looked at me lately. Calm, patient, careful. Like I was fragile. Like he didn't want to upset me. I had thought he was being kind. Now I wasn't sure. I looked at the signature on the paper again. It was mine, but I never signed it. It had been copied or forged. I knew my own writing. This wasn't it. I looked through the other papers again. The dates were recent. Just a few weeks ago. He had been planning this while still acting like everything was fine. Smiling at me, sleeping beside me. I didn't know what scared me more, the lies in the papers or the fact that he had written them so easily. He hadn't yelled or fought. He hadn't even warned me. He had just started building a plan behind my back. A quiet plan to remove me from my own life. I put everything back the way it was. I didn't want him to know I had seen it. I put the envelope back in the trash, just like I found it. I washed my hands, but they were still shaking. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I wasn't just afraid. I was angry, and I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't know how to look at my sister anymore. I kept thinking about the night I saw her outside with my husband. I couldn't forget how he gave her that envelope, how they spoke in whispers. I couldn't stop thinking about the papers I found inside it. None of it made sense, and I needed answers. But I couldn't just ask her directly. I had to be careful, so I invited her over. I made coffee like nothing was wrong. She came, acting normal, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She looked around a lot, fidgeted with her sleeves, kept her phone close. I watched her closely. I asked her small things, pretending to be casual. I said I'd been feeling weird lately, like things were off. I asked if she'd noticed anything. Her hands froze for a second. She gave a small, fake smile and said no. Then I looked her in the eye and asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" She blinked fast, her mouth opened, then closed. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. Her voice was quiet. I waited for her to explain, but she didn't. I asked her again, softer this time. She just shook her head and said she had to go. She left the coffee on the table, barely touched. After she left, I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. There were boxes full of old pictures and papers from when we were kids. I sat on the floor, looking through them. There were pictures of us together, laughing, hugging, dressed up for school events. I stared at one where we were holding hands in front of our childhood. I tried to remember how close we used to be. But then I remembered the way she looked at me lately. Distant, nervous, like she was hiding something. I thought back on the last year. She had started calling less. She always had a reason to avoid family dinners. Now I wondered if all those reasons were lies. Then I found a folder. Inside it were some old documents about the land our father left us. When he passed, he had made it clear in his will, the land was mine. He trusted me to keep it safe. He said I was the one who would protect it. My sister hadn't been happy about it at the time, but she never said much. I took out the will and read it again. I had a copy saved. As I read the words, something clicked in my mind. What if this was about the land all along? I looked around the room and thought about everything. My husband knew how much the land meant to me. He always asked about it, even though he said he didn't care about owning property. He said it was just old dirt. But now I saw it differently. What if they were working together? What if they wanted the land? If I was declared unfit, they could take control of the house, the land, everything. The thought made my stomach twist. I remembered the legal paper I saw in the envelope, the lies written about my mental state. Now it all made sense. My sister and my husband wanted the same thing, and I was in their way. They weren't just turning on me. They were trying to erase me. I sat there for a long time, holding the will in my hands. The truth was heavy, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too stunned, too numb. I looked at the photo again. 2 little girls, smiling at the camera. I didn't know who that girl beside me was anymore. But now I knew what I had to do. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own blood. Things started to feel strange around the house. At first, it was small. My keys weren't where I left them. I always put them in the same bowl by the door, but one morning they were missing. I looked everywhere. Later, I found them in the fridge. I didn't put them there. I was sure of it. Then my toothbrush was wet when I hadn't used it. I asked my husband if he had touched it, and he just laughed. "Are you sure you didn't brush and forget?" he said. I didn't forget. I hadn't brushed yet. He smiled like it was a joke, but I could feel something behind his eyes, something cold. I began to notice more. My books were moved. My perfume bottle was upside down. A glass I washed was dirty again. I started doubting myself. I would stare at the items and try to remember what I did. Sometimes, I'd even write it down. But the more I tried to prove I wasn't imagining things, the more things kept going wrong. Then it moved beyond the house. I sent a text to my friend about meeting for lunch. She never replied. I asked her days later, and she looked confused. "I never got that text," she said. I checked my phone. It showed it had been sent. I opened my email and noticed something strange. Some messages I clearly remembered writing were gone. Others were marked as read when I hadn't opened them. I tried to book a session with my therapist. I had seen her every 2 weeks for over a year. But this time she messaged me and said, "I hope everything's okay. I got your cancellation notice." I hadn't canceled anything. I asked her to check. She said someone using my name had sent a message through the clinic's portal. They had my login information. They even used my tone. She thought it was really me. But it wasn't. I knew who it was. My husband had access to my computer. He knew my passwords. He could pretend to be me easily. I called the clinic to lock my account. When I asked for the IP address used to make the changes, they said it came from my own home network. My heart sank. He wasn't just trying to confuse me. He was trying to take over my life, one step at a time. I felt like I was disappearing. My words weren't reaching people. My plans were being erased. My mind was being questioned. And the worst part, he was doing it all quietly, calmly, smiling the whole time. I stopped talking about it out loud. I knew no one would believe me without proof. I started writing everything down in a notebook I hid deep in the pantry. I didn't trust my phone or my computer anymore. I didn't even trust the walls in my own house. Something was happening to me, or more clearly, something was being done to me, not by a stranger, but by the person who once promised to protect me, and I wasn't going to let it continue. I didn't react anymore. No questions, no confusion, no surprise. When he laughed at my bad memory, I smiled. When my toothbrush felt used, I said nothing. When my texts vanished or objects moved without reason, I acted like I hadn't noticed. I kept my face calm and my voice light. Inside, I was watching everything. I began keeping track in a quiet way, using simple marks and short notes written in a private code only I understood. I hid them carefully inside old books he never touched. Boring titles about gardening and knitting, safe places. I needed more than notes. So I bought a small camera disguised as a charger. I placed it in the kitchen, near the hallway where he always made calls late at night. He waited until I was in bed to talk on the phone, but I was always awake. I memorized the sound of his footsteps and how long he stayed downstairs. After a few nights, I took out the memory card and checked the footage. My hands were cold, my breathing slow. I loaded it onto an old laptop hidden in the back of the closet. He didn't know it existed. In one video, he sat at the table, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low but clear. "Give it 2 more weeks. She'll crack before then. Her sister's going to handle the paperwork." He sounded so sure, so calm. My heart thudded in my chest. I replayed it, making sure I heard him right. There it was, the plan spoken out loud. They weren't trying to help me. They were preparing to remove me, permanently. That sentence told me everything. He was certain I'd break. They were counting on it. I was supposed to fall apart, and then they'd sign the document. Legal, clean, final. But now I had something they didn't expect. Evidence. I saved the clip and made copies. Then I moved fast. One flash drive went behind the bathroom, another inside a winter boot, one under a loose floorboard. I needed to protect the truth. When he looked at me across the room, I smiled. When he asked how I felt, I answered softly. I let him believe his plan was working. I didn't show fear. I didn't slip. I kept everything inside. I knew they wanted me gone. My sister had joined him, maybe from the start. They had planned each step like a careful game. But I was no longer guessing. I understood. They thought I was alone. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But I was already 3 steps ahead. I started thinking more about my father's land. He had always told me it would be mine one day. He made it clear in his will. I remembered how proud he was when he showed me the boundary line. It was quiet land, peaceful, with old trees and clean air. After he passed, I didn't go there much. I trusted everything was in order. But now, with everything happening, I had to look again. I searched through my old papers. I found a copy of the will. It clearly said the land belonged to me. No conditions, no mention of anyone else. But something didn't feel right. My sister had been distant since our father died. She never spoke about the land, even though she used to love it too. That silence made me curious. I visited the county office and asked to see any recent activity on the property. The clerk printed a file and handed it to me. As I read through it, my hand started to shake. There was a petition from 3 months ago. My sister had filed something against the will. Then, just 2 weeks later, a signed letter appeared saying she dropped the claim. The signature on that letter was mine, but I never signed it. I looked closely. The writing was similar, but not mine. It was a copy of my signature, not the real thing. She had faked it. She didn't just file a claim. She pretended I gave it up. I asked for a copy and took it home. That night, I sat at the table and stared at the paper. Then I remembered something worse. My husband was a notary. His stamp was on that document. His name was listed as the witness. It all came together like a cold wave hitting me. He had helped her. He had used his stamp and his job to make it official. He made it look real. He made it legal. I realized this wasn't just about confusion or mind games anymore. They were after something big, something real. They wanted the land. And to get it, they needed me out of the way. But now I had the documents. I had the dates, the fake signature, the seal. I had proof. It wasn't a guess or a feeling anymore. It was real. I looked at the paper again and felt something shift inside me. Fear turned into focus. They thought I was weak. They thought I would stay quiet, confused, and lost. But I knew the truth now. I had something stronger than fear. I had evidence. I didn't need to run. I needed to plan. I copied everything and hid the originals. Then I started thinking like that. They used the law to try and erase me. I would use the truth to bring everything into the light. They had started this quietly, but I would end it in the open. They thought I was breaking. They were wrong. I knew I couldn't fight them head on. They were watching me too closely. If I acted normal, they'd know something was wrong. So I gave them what they wanted to see. I began pretending to fall apart. Slowly, little by little. I left the fridge open. I forgot my phone in the freezer. I acted confused when my husband asked simple questions. I wore mismatched shoes around the house. I stopped brushing my hair. I left dishes in the sink for days. I walked around muttering to myself when I knew he was nearby. He looked at me with fake concern. I could tell he thought it was working. That made it easier to keep going. I started a fake diary. Each page was messy, full of strange sentences and scribbles that made no sense. I wrote like someone who had lost touch with reality. I even left it out where he could find it. A few days later, I noticed it had been moved. He had read it. I smiled quietly. That's exactly what I wanted. My sister came over more often. She brought me tea, blankets, and soft music. She acted sweet, but her eyes were cold. They both looked at me like I was broken glass. I played along. I thanked them too much. I repeated myself on purpose. I asked the same questions twice. They were falling for it. Then one evening, my husband told me a friend was coming to talk. A man in a suit arrived. He said he was a psychologist, but he didn't ask real questions. He watched me like he already knew what he wanted to write. I laughed at odd times and stared at the ceiling. He nodded and scribbled in his notebook. I saw the look they shared when he left. They thought it was almost over. But they were wrong. Before any of this, I had already met with someone, an old friend of my father's, now a lawyer. He believed me. I showed him everything, the forged papers, the notary stamp, the secret footage. He helped me connect with another expert, a forensic document examiner. She looked at the fake signature and confirmed it wasn't mine. I had more than just a story. I had facts. While I acted confused at home, I was preparing behind the scenes. I bought small voice recorders and placed them in the house, under the couch, behind the TV, inside a flower pot. I collected their words, their plans, and their lies. I made copies of everything. I kept one set hidden in the laundry room behind a loose tile. Another went to my lawyer. A third, I mailed to a trusted friend with no return address. Each day, I acted worse. Each night, I became stronger. They didn't notice. They were too focused on what they wanted to see. They believed their plan was working. That gave me time to finish mine. They thought I was weak, that I had no fight left. They had no idea I was building the ending. It was a quiet morning, the kind that feels too still, like something is waiting to happen. My husband made me tea. My sister came over with a small bag. They sat me down gently, like I might break. Their words were soft. "We love you. We're worried. This is for your own good." I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just listened and said, "Okay." That surprised them. I could see it on their faces. They expected a fight, some shouting, maybe panic. But I gave them peace. Calm. I smiled as I packed a small bag they had already prepared for me. Toothbrush. Pajamas. A book I never planned to read. I even hugged them both. We got into the car. The ride was quiet. My sister drove. My husband sat beside me, checking his phone. I stared out the window like I wasn't thinking. But every second, my mind was counting down. When we reached the facility, it looked clean and cold. A nurse stood by the door with a clipboard. My husband walked ahead, ready to hand her the papers. My sister stayed close, watching me like a hawk. Then, right before he could speak, another car pulled up. My lawyer stepped out, holding a thick folder. 2 police officers followed him. They walked straight toward us. My husband froze. "Actually," my lawyer said loud and clear, "it's not her who's checking in today." Everyone stopped moving. The nurse looked confused. My sister stepped back. My husband's face turned pale. My lawyer opened the folder and handed the officers a stack of documents. "Here's the footage of him planning to have her declared unstable," he said. "And here's the proof that her sister forged her signature. Notarized by him. All illegal." The police officers didn't speak much. They just took the papers, looked through them, and then turned to my husband. "We'll need you to come with us," one said. "Now." My husband tried to speak, but no words came out. My sister started crying. "We didn't mean," she whispered. But it was too late. I stood still, holding my small bag, watching them both. I didn't shout. I didn't smile either. I just watched as the plan they had built around me fell apart in front of them. The officers took my husband's phone, placed him in the back of their car, and drove away. My sister stayed behind, shaking. The nurse stepped inside quickly, avoiding everyone's eye. I looked at my lawyer and nodded. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now." The papers they had prepared were worthless. The fake reports, the secret calls, the lies, they were all out in the open. I had played along just long enough to make them confident. Confident enough to make a mistake they couldn't undo. They thought I'd walk through those doors and never come back. But instead, they were the ones who lost everything. And I was finally free. The truth didn't stay quiet for long. After the police took my husband, things moved quickly. The evidence was strong. The documents were real. The video and audio recordings spoke louder than any words I could have said. There was no way to deny what they had done. He was charged with forgery, fraud, and planning to take away my rights by using lies. The fact that he was a notary made it worse. He had used his position to stamp fake documents, to make it all look legal. But it wasn't legal. It was a crime. A serious one. My sister tried to say she didn't know everything. She acted like she was just following his lead. But it didn't matter. Her signature was on too many papers. Her visits were too regular. She was part of it. And she was a nurse. Nurses are trusted with people's health and safety. When the truth came out, she lost that trust. Her license was taken away. She could no longer work in hospitals or care for anyone. The story didn't stay hidden. I made sure of that. I shared everything with the right people. I gave copies of the documents and videos to a local reporter. I sat down with her and told my side. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just told the story clearly the way it happened. From the late-night whispers to the fake papers. From the lies to the trap I had to set. The news story came out 2 days later. It spread fast. People in town were shocked. Some had known my husband. They thought he was kind and smart. They didn't know what he had been planning behind closed doors. Others had worked with my sister. They trusted her. Now they looked at her with new eyes. I walked into a grocery store the next week. A woman I didn't know stopped me and said, "You're brave." Another man nodded at me and said, "I saw your story." People I had never spoken to started calling me strong. But I didn't feel strong. I had been scared. I had been careful. I had almost lost everything. Still, I was proud I didn't let them win. They tried to break me from the inside. They wanted to take my name, my mind, my land, my life. But I didn't break. One reporter asked me, "What would you say to them now?" I looked at the camera and said, "They wanted my mind. I gave them a nightmare instead." That line made it into the newspaper. It was printed in bold at the top of the page. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a warning. No one saw it coming. That made it more powerful. And I was finally done hiding. The house feels different now. Quiet, peaceful. The kind of silence that doesn't scare me anymore. I live here alone. Just me and the land my father left behind. For a while, I didn't know what to do with it. It held so many bad memories, but I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to give them the power to chase me away. So I stayed. And I built something new. I turned the place into a safe space. A home for women who had lived through things like I had. Not everyone gets believed. Not everyone gets a second chance. I wanted to give them that. The house became a retreat, a place to rest, to heal, and to start again. Slowly, women began to come. Some stayed a few weeks, some longer. We shared meals, planted flowers, and told quiet stories. There was no pressure, just kindness. It felt right, like this land was finally being used for good. My father would have liked that. I spent my days in the garden, my hands in the dirt. I grew herbs, tomatoes, and lavender. I built raised beds from old wood. It helped me feel strong again, building something with my own hands. At night, I sat on the porch with tea and watched the stars. No more fear. No more whispering in the dark. Just calm. Then one day, a letter came. There was no return address. Just my name. Inside was a postcard. The picture on the front was of a quiet road. On the back, just one sentence, written in careful letters. Still pretending to sleep? That was all. No name, no apology. But I knew who it was from. I could hear his voice in the words. He was still trying to get in my head, even from prison. Still playing games. I stood for a moment, holding the card between my fingers. The paper was thin, cheap. The ink was a little smudged. I stared at it, then walked out to the fire pit behind the garden. I didn't rush. I placed it in the center, lit a match, and watched it burn. The flames were small but bright. The paper curled in seconds. Ash drifted up into the sky. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel scared. I just felt done. He had tried to erase me. They both did. But I was still here. Breathing, planting, growing. I wasn't pretending to sleep anymore. I dusted off my hands, picked up my watering can, and went back to the garden. When life tries to erase you, rewrite the ending. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their strength. True power doesn't scream. It watches, it waits, and it rises. Just like she did. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and follow for more real stories that expose the dark and celebrate the comeback. Because survival isn't the end. It's the beginning.